Thank you very much, ma'am, for that wonderful introduction. Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, members of the board, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this is an amazing space. And when I look out there, I feel I'm in the presence of the future. All of you look terribly eager, I must say. It's wonderful, and it gives me a real pleasure, and it is an honor for me to be here today at the opening ceremony of the National Model United Nations. I always embrace the opportunity to come out, and I need my glasses. I always embrace the opportunity to come out of the UN space to have a chance to talk to people who are not always going to tell me about what it is their country wants and what it is their country will not accept from me. And to be able to engage and to hear about different experiences and to develop a special understanding among people, which is always what happens when I come to these kind of events. We, of course, are all concerned with humanity. But we have been too concerned with humanity for too long, and along the way we seem to have forgotten how to be concerned with other creatures and other things with which we occupy this planet. The forests, plants, wild animals, the birds, even the air we breathe, the fish, and the sea creatures in our oceans. Now, many of you have spent one or more semesters studying international relations, and these are not the kind of things you normally speak about when you study international relations. And you also, I'm sure, have studied how the United Nations works. You've all come from, I've just heard, all over the world, and over the next few days, you will be playing the role of diplomats and trying out your hand at negotiations. This is an important and exciting time, I'm sure, for all of you. And I'm really pleased that you're all doing what you're doing. The world needs new, smart, and hard-working diplomats, and I have no doubt you'll turn out to be those. In this world that is filled with uncertainty, political unrest, and inequality, some of you may be asking, how is it possible to make the world a better place? It's in light of this question that I want to talk to you about the many characterizations of what we have been doing and what you've just heard the Secretary General speak to, which is the most consequential international agreement of our time, and that is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and all the Sustainable Development Goals that are contained in it. For those of you who may not be familiar with this agreement, I thought I would focus my remarks on why we need a global development framework. It's not self-evident. What the 2030 Agenda is and why it is so consequential to you, this is important. Why it's consequential to your futures and to our world. And why it is that this document will bring the kind of support that we need to bring to bear to the challenges that we are facing in our world. I will also share with you some of the key lessons I've learned throughout the 3 years of the process that it took to get this document done and to get the world, all 193 countries, to agree on one process of protecting our world. So why do we need the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? Some of you here might be familiar with the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs as they're called. The MDGs were agreed by world leaders in September 2000 at the United Nations Millennium Summit. They aim to achieve 8 key development goals, but mainly for developing countries, and that is important to remember. These goals ranged from halving extreme poverty to halting the spread of diseases such as HIV and AIDS, and providing universal access to primary education. And significant progress was made towards achieving the 8 Millennium Development Goals, particularly in reducing the number of people living in poverty. Indeed, since 1990, we have seen the number of people living in extreme poverty across our globe reduce by 1.9 billion people to about 700 million who are still living in poverty today. We've done well, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. As 2015 and the time frame for the MDGs began to approach, because the MDGs ran from 2000 to 2015, it became clear that we needed to do something else to try to help complete the business of the MDGs and therefore finish the unfinished business. But we also realized that more sweeping changes needed to be taken on in the context of the challenges that we were facing in our world in order to achieve a world free of war, poverty, and environmental degradation. It was thus agreed that a new international agreement and set of goals was needed to enable the world to address the emerging complex challenges of our time. But what were these complex challenges? What were they, and why was it so urgent to get to work on them? These challenges came on three levels. First, at the level of society. Global population had exploded from about 1 billion in 1960 to 7 billion by 2015, and it's now projected to be getting to 9 billion by 2030. That's a lot of people on the same planet Earth. Poverty remained, as I said, a huge problem, with close to 1 billion people still living below the poverty line. Access to healthcare, water, and sanitation was still a global problem and still remains a global problem. And over 1 billion people still went to bed hungry, and still do, by the way. That number hasn't shifted. Hungry every day, every day, every day. Second, on the level of the economy. After the 2008 global economic meltdown, which some of you may remember, by 2012, when we began to think how we were going to put together the SDGs, things were not looking up. Joblessness and youth unemployment in particular remained a serious global phenomenon, and inequality was at global highs. But third, and probably most frightful, was the level of environmental and climatic concerns that gripped the world around then. After 100 years of breakneck global growth in industrialization and manufacturing, pollution and greenhouse gases were putting an enormous strain on our planet's life-giving and life-sustaining ecosystems. Our oceans, forests, lakes, rivers that give life to and protect global biodiversity were being slowly poisoned and destroyed. Today, over 80% of our beautiful coral reefs are in the process of dying as we sit here today. And even the very air that we breathe was being choked with pollutants and is still being choked with pollutants, and those same greenhouse gases were changing our life-giving climate in ways in which life as we know it on Earth was at threat and might actually be lost to us forever. In other words, life as we know it on our planet had been upended, and many species of animals and plants were being killed off, and yet we were charging along as if nothing was amiss. Things were and are to this day just as dangerous, sad, and as alarming as I described. So unlike the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals had to be hugely more ambitious. They could not just deal with health, education, water, and sanitation. They needed to deal with issues that could help save our planet and protect life as we know it. But more than that, the Sustainable Development Goals had to be universal. Universal. Why? Because the solutions to the problems I have just described required that the entire world, all the countries of the world, must come together to help solve these problems. No country or group of countries can solve them alone. All countries must make huge efforts to undo the enormous damage brought on by population rises, by our consumption and production habits, by the industrialization and manufacturing I spoke of, and the resultant greenhouse gases and biodiversity loss. Indeed, if we look even more closely at the state of our world, the need for such a broad and ambitious global framework is truly urgent. To begin with, despite the vast wealth of our world, and our world is wealthy, many of our most vulnerable and disadvantaged people, as I said, are still living in extreme poverty. And despite the incredible technological advances that have led to recent years to most of us walking around with advanced computers in our pockets in the shape of a smartphone, even today, despite of all of those advantages and advances, nearly 35 women continue to die in childbirth every hour, even today. 1.1 billion people live without electricity, even today. And nearly 1 billion people still lack access to safe water, as I said earlier. So you can imagine, in the midst of all this affluence, all these great technological achievements, women are still dying at the rate of 35 an hour, giving life to children. So it is true that the rapid and sustained transformation of industrialized economies has led to historically unprecedented levels of prosperity, opportunity, longevity, and quality of life. This is true, especially in developed nations. But the benefits of industrialization and globalization have failed to be shared equitably, both within and between nations, and as I have said, have come at a very heavy price to our environment. The World Bank reports that in-country income inequality is now higher than it was 30 years ago, with wages no longer rising at the same pace as labor productivity. I think you know about this here in the United States. And at the same time, women continue to earn 24% less, even today, than men, despite their work and despite their productivity. And they are only half as likely as men to have a full-time income generation work. And even politically, our systems seem to be under great strain. The rapid expansion of global communication has made inequalities within and between nations increasingly more evident. We see each other's lives and societies on our televisions and internet, no matter where we live in the world. So we've all become very conscious of how everybody else is faring. Now, finding a sustainable path to meet the legitimate development aspirations of those who have been left behind, those countries that haven't done well, and those in our countries who are not doing as well as those who are successful, this has become a real matter of urgency. Because we now need to extend the same level of prosperity as that is enjoyed by the developed country or by the rich in developing countries to the rest of the world, or else we will continue to have the strains that we face in our societies. Moreover, across our world, we are also bearing witness to rising insecurity, with intractable armed conflicts. Syria, 7 years, still going on. You heard what happened last weekend. Afghanistan, close on to 15 years. The DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, 20 plus years. South Sudan, the list is very long, and these are countries that have suffered and continue to suffer increased armed conflict. But we have also seen increased terrorism and violent extremism, an expansion of asymmetrical warfare, the ongoing risk of weapons of mass destruction falling into the hands of non-state actors, and the illegal proliferation of small arms and light weapons, all destabilizing international and national peace and security. The convergence of these factors has led to what we now see across the world: the worst humanitarian and refugee crisis since World War II. Millions of desperate people are fleeing armed conflict and the brutal effects of war, while others are escaping violence, persecution, and the systemic violations of their human rights. Others still are being uprooted and by disasters, which affect them, both climatic as well as natural disasters. And despite over half of the world's refugees being children, if you can believe that, far too often these vulnerable people seeking respite in unfamiliar lands are being met with xenophobia, intolerance, abuse, and exploitation. So what is to be done? That we need to urgently restore our devastated natural environment, combat climate change, preserve our declining biodiversity, and protect our oceans and forests is clear. But put simply, without changing our behavior, our world is on track to no longer be able to sustain human life as we know it. And that is not an exaggeration. It is a fact. It was in this global context, therefore, that in 2013, I was given the enormous responsibility, together with a colleague from Hungary, of bringing the world together to agree to a set of universal sustainable development goals that would transform our world for people, for the planet, and for prosperity. Together, we were tasked with chairing what was spoken to by Professor Pam, the United Nations Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals. The core of our work was clear. The Open Working Group was to agree on a proposal for sustainable development goals, as well as targets and indicators for monitoring and implementing those goals. As you can imagine, it was a pretty daunting task. We had to work, as I said earlier, with 193 countries in the room, representing 7 billion people, and over 2,000 non-governmental organizations. The task was complex and fraught with the minefields of political, social, and cultural challenges that come with dealing with so many different kinds of governments and peoples. After 3 years of intense negotiation and over 300 meetings of the Open Working Group, in September 2015, world leaders came together in New York to adopt, by consensus, which for any negotiator, that's the crowning glory, the historic 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So what is it that the 2030 Agenda is for, and what will it do? The 2030 Agenda, as I said, is universal. It is integrated and mutually reinforcing. Now, those are words to some of you, but they mean a lot, and I would ask you to study those words when you think through the 2030 Agenda. It's a universal, integrated, and mutually reinforcing, and we call it a master plan that comprises 17 sustainable development goals and 169 targets, all to be met by 2030. The breadth of the issues covered and the promise of the 2030 Agenda, I am very proud to say, is immense. If implemented urgently, and urgency is of great significance here, and if implemented effectively and at scale, it will improve the lives of the world's people by eliminating extreme poverty and hunger, improving access to clean water and sanitation, promoting good health and well-being, improving access to education, and empowering women and girls to play their full role in our world. It will increase prosperity for all by driving sustainable and green economic growth, improving access to decent work, promoting social inclusion, and reducing inequalities within and between countries. Importantly, it will protect our planet by restoring the health and, where possible, the biodiversity of our oceans, seas, and ecosystems. It will help reduce emissions and combat the effects of climate change together with the Paris Agreement for climate change. It will help increase access to affordable, clean, and renewable energy, fostering responsible patterns of consumption and production, and create inclusive, sustainable, and resilient cities. It's not a wish list. It is a plan. And finally, it will help build and sustain peace by promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, supporting transparent and accountable institutions, improving global governance, promoting the rule of law, and ensuring access to justice for all. A fundamental tenet of the 2030 Agenda is the commitment that we have all now agreed upon to leave no one behind, to leave no country behind, to leave no section of the society behind, to ensure that prosperity touches all. What this means in practice is that we must ensure development gains reach the most vulnerable, the most disadvantaged, and the most marginalized. It is unacceptable, as I said a little earlier, that billions continue to live in poverty and poor health without access to clean water, such a basic thing as clean water, while others in the same world or in the same country are enjoying unprecedented high levels of prosperity and security. Our SDG implementation plan must target those in greatest need as a matter of priority. The final goal of the 2030 Agenda, that is Goal 17, addresses how we shall achieve these Sustainable Development Goals. It concentrates on enhancing the mobilization of domestic resources, intensifying international cooperation and overseas development assistance, promoting fair trade, capacity building, and technology transfer, and creating effective and efficient public-private partnerships. So finally, before I end, I need to answer the question, why are the SDGs important to young people? You are the most interconnected generation in all of history, thanks to the globalized economy and digital technology. You also share similar values of fair play, equity, and equality, and a sense of purpose and commitment to a better world. You may not know this, but in many ways you're a special and gifted generation. The SDGs are a manifestation of these ethos and values that your generation cherishes. Governments and companies now recognize this fact. Therefore, most governments and companies now want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But to do so, they need to attract the best among you, the very best minds among you, because those are the minds that are going to help us engineer the success that we need to engineer to achieve the SDGs. But they're also aware that the best minds among you are looking for companies and employers that are committed to a more just corporate responsibility stance, but not just corporate responsibility, but to a better, more equal world that helps us to save our planet and protect it for future generations. Young people like you want to be the change agents, I have no doubt, that the world needs today. And that is why we are lucky, I would suggest to you, that we have the SDGs in place, because those SDGs create that enabling environment for human beings who have a high attachment to the ideals of responsibility, planetary responsibility, equity, fair play, and equality. These are the kind of people we are targeting. You represent this new human being. Youth, such as yourselves, will need to be the ones to lead this charge, to see a future where no one goes to bed hungry, where all children can go to school, where the environment is protected, where we all live in peace, and where no one, as I said, is left behind. This will take new, innovative ideas, strategic actions, an urgent collaborative behavior between us, among us, and between all the countries of the world. If you look at the progress that has been achieved by our world in the last 70 to 50 odd years, you'd be amazed. We've made incredible progress. And there is absolutely no reason why in the next 15 years we cannot achieve the goals that we've now set ourselves to ensure that we have a better world for us all. With 1.8 billion young people in our world, you can, and I'm truly confident that you will, use your passion, your voice, your talents, and your commitment to change the world. So please go out there and do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, both for your advocacy of the SDGs and your recognition of the abilities of this group of people to innovate and achieve that future. The Ambassador has said that he needs to return to his busy schedule, so we will present a small gift to him and invite you to again thank him for his remarks and for his example.